How's the project going, guys?
Good. Yeah.
How's the project going? This is the worst thing I've ever worked on in my life.
What project?
Nobody listens to a single thing I say, and I'm going to cry.
We're fighting so much that we're just working on our own then. I don't know.
I think I'm going mad.
Well, they're both coming at me. I don't know what to do anymore. Like, I
need
need to
to
work
work
on
on
my
my
own.
What I done before the due date, then I wouldn't have to look it over for you.
Bro, I've been working on this and like I think it's done. I think it's good, but you just don't want to read it.
Yeah, because it was due 4 days ago.
Bro, I don't care anymore.
Guys, stop fighting. Yeah, we're basically not working together anymore. It's just a competition at this point.
Wait. Before you guys decide to work separately and isolate yourself, take this presentation. It's from a group who studied Wuthering Heights in the past, and they wanted to make sure that all of you knew the understanding of working together as a team.
The big theme in Gothic literature is the use of the novel to portray the author's story. Understanding the author helps us form a clear interpretation of the novel's symbolic and thematic nature, essentially the layers that expose the dangers and the improper connections.
Emily Brontë, the author of Wuthering Heights, paints the novel as a depiction of the destructive isolation she faces. Growing up in the Yorkshire moors, which also happens to be the setting for Wuthering Heights, she lives in overwhelming solitude, far removed from the noise of society.
She gravitates toward her home, preferring the independence of this shelter to express her true identity, an identity she feels society will not let her experience as a female writer. She channels her imagination into writing, and through that she finds her truest form of expression.
The context Emily Brontë lives in is rigid and strict, reflected through the characters in Wuthering Heights, who are superficially expected to meet certain social expectations. In contrast, her siblings describe her as the most non-conforming. She publishes her novel under a male pseudonym, so people take her seriously.
She engages deeply with the idea of the outcast, writing as one herself. She observes how easily people like her become alienated for standing out and uses her novel's characters to express the pain of that alienation in a way readers can understand. She reveals that isolation isn't just separation, it's also being misunderstood.
The novel opens with a character named Mr. Lockwood, who learns of the Wuthering Heights story while staying in the Yorkshire moors. Two distinctly contrasting households emerge: Wuthering Heights, home of the Earnshaws, and Thrushcross Grange, home of the Lintons. This juxtaposition between wildness and calmness emphasizes the theme of extremities.
The story revolves around two characters, Catherine Earnshaw and Heathcliff, souls destined for each other from the moment they meet. The extremities of their love expose both their reckless and almost animalistic dependence on one another, and it shows the thin line between passion, madness, and isolation.
As they grow older, the forces of their environment and the expectation of their households pull them apart. Their isolation becomes a precursor to others' isolation. Characters like Hindley, Edgar, and Isabella mirror the same loneliness. It's a powerful testament to isolation's reach.
Every character, in some way, whether through gender, wealth, or class, faces isolation in the story. This isolation can come from others or from oneself in the loss of identity. The destruction the novel follows underscores the human need for sustainable connection. Let's start off by understanding where isolation comes from.
Let's think about this. You're raising a newborn child. As they grow, you notice that they struggle to maintain connection with their peers. Is this the personality of the child, or is this an abnormal fault on you? A classic nature versus nurture argument. Wuthering Heights characters act as testaments to the idea that isolation is caused by environmental influences, not innately driven.
Maybe she's isolated because you shouldn't be throwing your bait.
Nonsense. As Eric Levy, the author of 55 astounding Gothic literary articles, puts it, Wuthering Heights explores two types of defective love in childhood, each barring the path to fulfilling love in adulthood: unlove and overlove. He studied the correlation between the strain of love received in formative years and the strength of connection as an adult to confidently conclude that there is a relationship worth exploring. Childhood is painted as a period of maximum impressionability, a beautifully pure canvas to demonstrate the effects of unlove and overlove. Within Wuthering Heights, unlove initially makes childhood an experience of neglect, abuse, and rejection for Heathcliff. Mrs. Earnshaw and Hindley view him as a gypsy brat in the house who demeans their status as individuals in a family. Hindley quickly notices Mr. Earnshaw's inexplicable overindulgence of Heathcliff.
When unlove prevails, overlove is natural. We have a humanistic tendency to love the marginalized, represented by Mr. Earnshaw.
But this puts the people we overlove in danger of isolation, because in Heathcliff being overloved, Hindley becomes unloved. They are trade-offs of each other that cannot coexist. Heathcliff thus becomes vulnerable to Hindley's core resentment and jealousy, which takes the form of separating Heathcliff from Catherine as a punishment.
Heathcliff's inability to ever reconnect with Catherine properly before her death exemplifies the idea that the overlove he received in his childhood is retaliated against by ensuring he's isolated forever.
Similarly, in abusing his power to separate Catherine from Heathcliff, he establishes enemies in both of them. He wants to punish Heathcliff for the lack of love he received from his father in his childhood, and in doing so actually severs the meaning that Catherine and Heathcliff provide for each other. He loses his brother and sister, and thus has no support system, with vengeance brewing as Heathcliff actively sits and studies how to pay Hindley back. They do not wish to provide him love, justifiably, as he took that away from them.
We can conclude how easily Hindley transfers a feeling of unlove to others, but equally how the unlove he gave them manifests back to him, causing further isolation.
One aims to isolate their isolator. This means that by causing isolation for someone else, or viewing someone else's connections in a negative light, it can result in the inability to authentically connect for yourself.
While it may seem like Hindley chose to isolate others, the unlove he was forced into in childhood festers to cause him to act in an unloving manner.
At Thrushcross Grange, overlove prevails, defined as a devotion which is essentially hypocritical and selfish. The Linden parents have a tendency to overprotect and coddle their children, as they do with their son, Edgar. When he develops a liking for Catherine, it can be superficially accredited to the fact that she stays at Thrushcross Grange for 5 weeks, and really becomes the only female he has had access to in this manner. Although she marries Edgar, she seems destined for the dark figure, Heathcliff.
Her yearning for Heathcliff proves that her relation with Edgar, even after marriage, has a shallow foundation. Edgar invests very little into his relation with Catherine because he doesn't need any more love.
He focuses on attaching to her, so he can retreat them both to the Grange where his pre-existing love thrives. This causes Catherine's commitment to Heathcliff prior to her death, leaving Edgar ultimately isolated. While Isabella Linton was also overloved as a child of the Grange, her relationship with Heathcliff quickly reveals some dire consequences.
The abuse and neglect she faces from Heathcliff resembles the unlove he once faced.
We see another example of how unlove stems from overlove. Heathcliff is envious of the happiness Isabella experienced in her early life, and aims to reproduce his past emotional conditions for her. His torture effectively extinguishes her love for him. As an honorable woman, Isabella makes her main endeavor in relations to understand and not to evaluate, causing her to be trapped in this cycle.
Her early overlove gives her a vessel of escape, but is equally the cause of her torment. Isabella essentially brings harm onto herself due to the blindness she inherits to healthy relationship indicators.
The poor decision to marry Heathcliff underscores tainted judgment of character, originating from lack of experience in relations due to overlove.
All the characters' need for love is exceeded only by their distrust of it, receiving too much or too little.
What starts off as an innocent childhood
is now ongoing isolation.
Now let's understand what isolation implies.
If isolation starts in childhood, what happens when those early emotional wounds follow you into adulthood? What happens when love turns into something that traps you instead of frees you? In Wuthering Heights, the effects of isolation slowly takes over the characters' lives like a haunting presence. Emily Brontë shows this through one repeating image, the window. It's more than a piece of glass. It's a border between life and death, human and supernatural, the inside and the outside. In many ways, it's like how many people today can be surrounded by others but still feel separated between an invisible barrier, connected yet still disconnected at the same time. As literary critic Dorothy Van Gant explains, the window scene compacts into the image of a demonic child scratching at the pane, trying to get from the outside in. Lockwood's nightmare of Catherine's ghost knocking on the glass turns isolation into something supernatural, as if the soul itself is trapped. The window becomes a symbol of how close connection and separation really are, just like how in real life, when we crave for closeness, but struggle to truly let people in. Later, when Catherine opens her window during her fever, she leans out into the cold wind and calls for Heathcliff.
That moment shows her desperate need to escape her restricted life at Thrushcross Cranch and return to the wild life she once shared with Heathcliff. But by reaching for that freedom, she literally catches her death. Her own longing becomes something her body cannot handle. The intensity of her desire to escape ends up destroying her. Brontë turns her yearning into tragedy, showing that isolation doesn't just keep people apart, it kills her from the inside out. It reminds us that constantly chasing something unreachable, whether it's perfection, love, or control, can end up harming us instead of setting us free. Ingrid Geerken writes that Brontë redefines death as its narrative state. When Catherine dies, her bond with Heathcliff doesn't disappear, it becomes something spiritual that refuses to end. Life and death overlap for a moment, showing how love and grief can exist together. But this also proves that isolation can blur the line between devotion and destruction. Heathcliff's sadness becomes his entire reason to live. When he says, "I cannot live without my soul," he refuses to let go of Catherine, and his love turns into obsession. By the end of the novel, he dies with the window open beside him, hoping he can finally reunite with her spirit. Brontë shows that isolation doesn't just exist in emotions, it becomes psychological and even spiritual. In real life, when people cut themselves off after disappointment or loss, they can start to live in their memories instead of the present, the same way Heathcliff lives with ghosts instead of people. Susan Jarrett McKinstry says that Wuthering Heights is a world where fantasy and desire overcome the adult laws of reality. Catherine's words, "I am Heathcliff," reveal how their love removes every boundary between them. What begins as connection turns into possession, a need to own and control one another completely. Their identities blend until neither can exist without the other, but instead bringing them closer, it traps them in isolation. McKinstry explains that Catherine's ghostly return, her ice-cold hand clutching his wrist, turns their dream of eternal love into permanent exile from the world of living. Their relationship shows that when love becomes possession, it stops being a source of comfort and it becomes a prison of its own making. At the end of the novel, Heathcliff dies with his window open, finally at peace, or maybe finally gone. Van Gent says that Brontë unites the outside and the inside, the dark and the bright worlds. Death becomes the only way to finally escape isolation. While it's dark, it also reminds us that when we let isolation take over, we lose connection to life itself. In the end, the window reveals how emotional distance can lead to psychological and spiritual separation. Heathcliff and Catherine become consumed by isolation, which leaves them caught between love and emptiness.
Finally, let's see what isolation can lead to.
We hear that Wuthering Heights is a love story, a grand passion even. But the true nature of the novel is not love, but rather a dangerous cycle.
Isolation is a sickness. Obsession is a symptom.
And madness precedes them.
Heathcliff and Catherine share an obsessive world that consists of only them, establishing the start of their isolation. Ultimately, each event results in the madness of Heathcliff and his end obsessive want for revenge. Marianne Thormahallen calls them the lunatic and the devil's disciple. But what does this mean? The boy lives reasonably comfortable under old man Earnshaw's rule, and miserable under Hindley's, but his closeness to Catherine is enough to keep him. She goes on to say that Catherine leaving ultimately leads to Heathcliff wanting revenge on Hindley, and when he returns from his trip, he comes back the man that Catherine said she would want to marry, a man with a facade of wealth and status. But what does the devil do? He ensures no one else can have goodness. Heathcliff's final act of isolation turns into a physical manifestation of his obsession with Catherine. He turns the Heights into a place where, as Deborah LUTZ argues, the living are treated as relics in a death culture in the Victorian era, and the death, like Catherine's, become paramount. He is obsessed with Catherine's corpse and being close to her even after she is buried, ensuring that the past never leaves. He enforces confinement of his son Linton, stripping him away of the life he knows, as well as young Cathy and poor Hareton. He locks them down inside a suffocating environment full of cruelty. Young Cathy tells Heathcliff, "But I'm glad I've got better, to forgive it, and I know he loves me. For that reason, I love him. Mr. Heathcliff, you have nobody to love you, and however miserable you make us all, we still have the revenge of thinking that your cruelty arises from your greater misery. You are miserable, are you not? Nobody will cry for you when you die." Young Kathy, kept in the grange by her father, is filled with ignorance. She mistakes the moor for the sea, much like mistaking the darkness of Wuthering Heights for something beautiful, her freedom. Her desire for Linton is a temporary madness because of her isolated life. She is seeking to escape, only to end up in an even more prison of the Wuthering Heights. Patsy Stoneman's feminist criticism highlights this perfectly. The novel becomes relentless. This environment strips young Kathy of her life, her books, and her passions, her freedom, and even more than before, isolating her into oppression. She says that we read Wuthering Heights as a structured cycle. The contrast between Kathy, the first story, about a girl's refusal to enter some patriarchal order, while the second Kathy story revises her mother's by having the girl accept her entry into the father's law, which is a part of Heathcliff's plan to marry Linton and Kathy and to have both Thrushcross Grange and Wuthering Heights. This moment mirrors Catherine's the first decision, driven by her own sense of entrapment and longing for something grander, Heathcliff, than her surroundings, Edgar, but ultimately leads to her death, so much so that Heathcliff says that he has caused Catherine's death because of his return.
Alright, after all of that, what did you guys actually learn about isolation from Wuthering Heights?
You can see how obsession and madness spread isolation to everyone around them. Heathcliff traps the younger generation in the same cycle he grew up in, and it shows how one person's pain can shape the whole environment if they don't deal with it.
I think what we realize is that isolation doesn't just show up randomly, right? It usually starts when people grow up without the right kind of love. And then some of these characters, they get ignored, some of them get smothered with love, but then they both end up struggling to connect later on in life, which I find interesting. So a lot of their actions aren't just their choices, it's what they've been put into and what they've been forced to do.
Then we looked at what happens when you carry that into adulthood. The window scene shows how isolation becomes emotional and even spiritual. Catherine literally gets sick from wanting a life she can't have, and Heathcliff ends up living more with ghosts than actual people. It shows that when you shut people out or hold on too tightly to the past, you basically isolate yourself without meaning to.
So what should people take away from this?
Wuthering Heights basically teaches that real connection takes effort, and if you avoid it, you don't just isolate yourself, you isolate everyone around you too.
We take the small things in our society for granted, like jealousy, leaving people out, pushing people aside out of our groups. These can fester into bigger problems if you don't deal with them right away.
And isolating yourself because you're hurt just makes everything worse. It closes the window instead of fixing what's on the other side.